Good evening and welcome to Princeton Public Library. My name's Tim Quinn and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at the library. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to our community room this evening for an event, Matt Katz in conversation with Charles Stile. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please note that this room is equipped with a hearing loop that pairs with T-coil technology in hearing aids. If you require hearing assistance and don't have a hearing aid, we have headphones available on the top of the piano. There was absolute no shame in that whatsoever if you'd like to grab one. And we kindly ask that you silence your electronic devices during the talk. There will be ample time for audience Q&A at the end of the presentation, but we ask that you wait until I get you the microphone in Phil Donahue style before asking your question so that everyone can hear it. Before my quick intro of the speakers, just as an FYI, I'd ask that you raise your hand if you listen to Inconceivable Truth. Wow. Thank you. It's not required. There might be a few spoiler alerts in there, though. So last spring, Charlie sent me a text saying that Matt's new podcast was dropping and it was generating a lot of buzz. I was curious and listened, got hooked, began pushing it on family and friends, some of whom are here tonight. And I reached out to Matt to ask if he'd come here to talk about it. He's been very gracious throughout the process. Usually we're sort of author focused and there's a book to sell. And I understand that there's a book in the works about this story, and the library's already put in dibs for the book kickoff event. So just as we hosted the kickoff of Matt's book about Chris Christie, American Governor. Anyway, I don't want to waste too much time with the intros, so please read our calendar listings if you want detailed professional bios. I will say that Matt and Charlie are two of the finest journalists you could find anywhere between New York and Philadelphia. Both are great writers and accomplished reporters, and I would say you don't always get both in a journalist. They've won multiple awards, notably a Peabody for Matt, and Charlie, the Lifetime Achievement Award in New Jersey Journalism from the Corporation for New Jersey Local Media. Matt is the executive producer of CityCast Philly, a daily podcast and newsletter about Philadelphia. Go Birds. And Charlie lives in Princeton and is a senior member of the New Jersey State House Press Corps. Is that right? You're the... He's a columnist for the Record of Bergen County, and I would say he's the best interviewer I know, so that's why I recruited him for this special event. Before I hand it over to them, and I've talked enough, I know, I want to point out that we're honored to have two special guests with us tonight, two of the stars of Inconceivable Truth. Matt's parents, Rachel and Richard Katz, are here. Inconceivable Truth, sorry. And with that, take it away.
Oh, you want to start? Okay. Well, thank you, Tim. And thank you all very much for coming out on this very chilly evening. And I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. And I also see some great, as a point of personal privilege, great reporters and that I've worked with over the past. I have Mary Caffrey, who joined me at the State House 30-some years ago as a State House reporter. And of course, we got just kind of quietly slinking in here is Pulitzer Prize-winning Wendy Ruderman, who I worked with at the Trenton Times and Bergen Record. And we got to drag her up here to talk about her Philadelphia, talk about her work uncovering corruption in the Philadelphia police force. So Anyway, Matt, again, thanks so much for coming.
Oh, yeah,
Coming
Charlie,
up here.
thank you very much. And thanks for everybody being here and for so many of you listening.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. My parents came down from New York City.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I couldn't get my parents to come to Princeton very often. And but I you know what strikes me? I mean, this whole story begins sort of as a personal journey that you were already embarked on early on in your life. This quest to understand who you believe to be your biological father, Warren.
Yeah.
And you had this gnawing need to know about his identity and this guy who left behind debts and a lot of questions. And then you get the results back from Ancestry.com, and I don't know. First, tell us what it was like opening those results. I mean, you go into that in the podcast, but I don't know. I got a feeling it was a lot more like, holy shit, this is too much to comprehend.
Yeah, I mean, initially the numbers weren't fully 50% not Jewish. It was something because the way the DNA works, the more users they get, the more people spit in the tube, the more exact their results are. So initially it said there was a range. It said something like 25 to 50% Irish, British, or Scottish. And it didn't like barrel me over necessarily. I just assumed there was like an easy explanation, which of course there was not an easy explanation. There was an extremely complicated explanation. So a full, more than a year went by. Actually, well, it was,
I didn't know.
Before if you get the dates right, we did the test, and it was 2016.
Yep.
And actually almost 2 years went by where I just had this information and I knew that according to Ancestry, I was not 100% Jewish, as I always thought I was. And the percentages kept creeping up. So it was like 20 to 50%, and then 30 to 50%, and then eventually it became 50%, and then it became 50% Irish. And there were so many other explanations. I just kind of came up with, and it was just like a thing that I would hypothesize about, like with friends once in a while, or with my wife, like, well, we know my grandmother was born here, but we know some of her other loved ones siblings were born in Eastern Europe. So, and we know that a lot of Jews stopped in England on the way to America, so maybe some shenanigans happened in England, who knows? But then, so that was one explanation. But then my mom takes the test.
That was important. That was a crucial confirming piece of evidence.
Well, right. So if my grandmother on my mother's side stopped in England and she's not fully Jewish, then therefore my mother wouldn't be. My mother comes back, she's 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, and she's my mother. So then that leaves my father, my biological father, who I had no contact with, but I knew he was Jewish. I had interviewed his parents now 20-something years ago because I had such an on-again, off-again relationship with his family, and I was curious about where we came from, and I had their whole Jewish immigration story from Russia, so I knew he was Jewish. So then what I decided was, because he was the black sheep of their family, that he was adopted and never fully accepted by the family. And he was born in 1941, and the story I tell in the podcast is I made up this story that he was my grandparents are in Queens. It's 1941. They have one child, and there's an Irish family down the block because it's Queens. I'm sure the Irish and the Jews are in the same neighborhood. And the old man, the father in the Irish family is off to war, and the mother has 10 kids at home, and she's pregnant. So she gives up the remaining child to the Jewish family down the block.
That's like a Hollywood B movie.
My father.
Yeah, I mean.
So that was the theory I had.
So, I mean, what about these? Were there these kind of clues? I mean, these subtle clues and remarks you heard over the years about your coloring and your. Did they kind of start creeping into your consciousness, or did it all kind of come cascading down into kind of this crushing realization, or is this kind of like a slow burn?
It was a
was that gnawing
slow
at you?
burn. There were a bunch of whiskey comments I remember from my parents
Whiskey?
and from my in-laws that I like whiskey more than the average Jewish guy, and maybe that was the indication. And yes, I definitely started thinking about how people at synagogue when I was a kid would say I looked goyish, meaning not Jewish, but it didn't fully set in that this was like a reality, that I could possibly not be. I mean, my identity was, I mean, talk about this in many ways, still is, but I mean, it was completely, I was just a fully Jewish guy. It was really hard to comprehend. And there was no obvious explanation. And yeah, 2 years went by without any clear explanation.
That's a
Almost
slow
2 years,
burn. Yeah. Now, so it seems, listening to the podcast, it kind of what turbocharges this from being a focus on Warren, and then you get this result back, and now you're telling me it took 2 years. The thing that really caught my attention was your stint on the radio show, where that call-in show, when people you had to kind of improvise. And you said, oh, let's do a story. I just took this test, and I'm getting all these results, and it's this bizarre result back, and you get flooded with people about this subject.
Yeah.
Was that the moment you said, when the reporter light went off, and you're saying, I got this is a big audience out there for this story. I'm on top. I think I put my finger on a really big untapped story. It's unusual, and it could affect a lot of people. Is that when it set right in? Like, I'm going to grab this story and I'm going to run with it.
It's exactly it. I mean, the phone lines, when I just say this thing, I took a test, the DNA test. Thought I was 100% Jewish my whole life. I'm not. I don't understand why. And the phone lines light up on WNYC.
That was amazing.
And we had a guest who was supposed to come into the studio for an interview. She canceled. I had to just vamp and fill a half hour of live radio at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday, and people called in with all kinds of amazing stories, both about DNA discoveries and just their genealogy searches. And one guy says he traced his lineage 1,000 years, and people found out they had identities that they weren't what they thought they were, and that somebody had an affair a generation ago, and they learned new siblings and all this stuff. And then I get this email from a listener. He's like, "I can help you."
Yeah,
solve
that
this
came right
mystery.
afterwards.
So it all kind of
Big Lou.
happened then at the same time. Like the information started, and then the way things unfolded felt like really otherworldly at that point. It felt like there were unseen forces sort of like pushing me in the right direction. This guy, Lou, who I'm still in touch with, he emailed me and he's like, I heard your thing on the radio. You want to know why you're not Jewish? Join this. He goes,
Tracing the Tribe, wasn't
Tracing the Tribe. But he says, I'm not a genealogy expert, but I know this guy at shul, and he told me you got to go to Tracing the Tribe on Facebook. So I go to this closed Facebook group, basically for Jewish genealogy nerds, and I post my story, and immediately in the comments, your father is not Jewish, your real father's not Jewish, your real father's not Jewish. I said, that doesn't make sense. And then this woman's like, I can help you. And
search angel.
These people online, these search angels who, for free, because they've mapped their own family, they want to help other people map their families.
I want to ask about that. But, just to step aside a second, sort of a process question. I mean, the production and the organization as a narrative is really outstanding. But it made me think, when did you pitch this podcast idea? Did you have it all fully developed before you went and sold it, and how did you sell it? I mean, this is pretty. Or did you wait you get halfway through and say, man, I'm on this quest. I'm running at dead ends, but I'm miraculously helped at the last second. this could make a great story. I don't have it complete yet, but maybe I could pitch it. How did it work?
So at first I pitched it to Radiolab. People familiar with Radiolab? Popular podcast on WNYC. I work at WNYC. This involves science, involves a mystery. There's a narrative here. I thought they'd be interested, and initially they were, and we started producing it, and then they, as they often do, I mean, they have a very high bar for stories. They decided that it felt at that point, it was early on, and the information I had in my journey, they felt like it sounded too much like what they described as kind of a typical story of genealogical discovery, and there wasn't anything different there. Turned out there was, but they didn't think so at the time. So I got rejected there. And then as I learned more things, but still could not crack this mystery of both how I was conceived and who my real father was, I realized I just couldn't do it at nights and weekends anymore. I was working to try to sort this out, and I just couldn't figure it out. I needed time, and in order to make this thing, I would need to have the time to make the thing. I pitched it to This American Life. The initial producer really liked it. He presented it to the whole team. Ira Glass was in the room. I got the message back. Ira Glass says he's fascinated by your story, wishes you the best of luck, but we're not going to do it. Not the first or last time I was rejected by This American Life. So then I got extremely lucky. I found out more information. I found, which we can get to, including half siblings and more information about how I might have come to exist. And I decided in 2022 to take my family to Ireland. And part of it was a family vacation. My kids had never been to Europe. It was the cheapest flight to Europe was to Dublin. And so that was part of the reason. And the other reason was I knew based on with these ancestry, you can figure out, it's pretty easy to figure out who your great-great-great-grandparents are. That's actually the easiest thing to figure out because you have so many third cousins. Everybody has a bajillion third cousins. So inevitably you will have many third cousins that come up on the DNA sites when you put in your DNA. So if you trace your third cousins up, you can start to identify some of your several great-great-grandparents. And I did, and I was able to locate a record for my great-grandfather in the Irish census from the early 1900s. Excuse me. And I was at I was about to go to Ireland, June 2022, to basically try to, go to this farm where he lived and see if anybody knew this family name. And I had a journalism awards luncheon 2 days before I'm supposed to leave, the Livingston Awards. I didn't win anything, but I'd won years ago, and I keep going back every year. And I keep going back every year.
Yeah, it's a free meal. It's a free meal.
It's a free meal. It's a delicious meal. It's at the Yale Club.
Yeah, nice.
You can get white wine at lunch. So there were a lot of incentives. Plus, there's a lot of big wig journalist types there every year. And I always thought I was going to get offered a job at the New York Times in the elevator after the event. Never happened. But I'm at the table for audio people, for podcast people. And Anna Quinlan, everybody know Anna Quinlan, the former New York Times columnist. She's involved in New York Public Radio, WNYC. I know her a little bit, and she moves my seat, which changed my life when she did this. She moved my seat next to a woman who was on the board of WNYC. She's like, you have to meet this woman. She's on the board of WNYC. You work at WNYC.
She knows how to hustle.
So I'm sitting next to this woman, and I'm talking to her about my trip to Ireland, just making small talk, going to Ireland with the family in a couple of days. Why are you going to Ireland? Just found out I'm Irish, trying to figure out why that is. Also learned I was 100% Jewish. Now it turns out I'm Irish. The other guy at the table on the other side of her overhears what she's saying. He was the executive producer of a podcast company called Rococo Punch. And that year, he was there because they had done a podcast about Mother Teresa that won this Livingston Award. And he overheard what I was saying, and he says, excuse me, we're actually I'm working on a podcast about genealogy, and I'm working with a genealogist. We're developing it. It's in the early stages. Could we maybe talk a little bit? Exchange information. We start talking. He's fascinated by my story. Long story short, he's like, we're not going to do the podcast about the genealogist. We'd like to do your podcast instead.
Wow.
And we enter into an agreement. They go and find somebody to pay for the thing, this place called Waveland.
Yeah.
And I got a podcast deal.
Okay, but you didn't come to the conclusion that we all come to in Chapter 8.
And I still didn't have it.
So you had a deadline then, didn't you?
So I start the podcast in August 2023.
Yeah.
I had lived that point in my life, I was up to Chapter 4 of this 8-part series.
Okay.
Like that's what I had experienced at that point. So in August 2023, I'm like, okay, now I told them when I convinced them to make this podcast with me, I said, listen, I will find the identity of my father. I didn't know that was going to happen.
So that's what I mean. That's putting it out there, bro.
I felt like there's too much information on these DNA sites. There's too many relatives. And with the time and the space to figure it out, I knew I could do it. Plus, that genealogist whose podcast they were supposed to make, they still had her, she was still like associated with Cocoa Punch. So she was there to help me, this woman, Christina Bryan.
Yeah.
So I knew I had a professional.
Yeah.
And I had time. Well, not that much time. I had 6 months to make a podcast and to figure out who my father was.
Were you under pressure, though, to come to a conclusion? Or, I mean, so did you just on a contract? It would
have sucked.
Right, I know, but I mean, you had to deliver the goods.
In my mind, yes, I felt like I had to deliver the goods.
Yeah, you got to deliver the goods. I'm getting sweaty thinking
I said, I don't know if I'm going to meet
I pitch
him.
a story to my editor once for a Sunday thing, and sometimes I can't deliver the goods. And I'm all, you talk to my wife, I'm going to sweat him in a lather.
I mean, but there's a certain degree of bullshit I feel like you learn by talking to editors over the years.
Yeah, you do. You find ways.
And I feel like I use that to sell the fact. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to meet this person. I don't know if he's alive, but I do feel like I can identify him. And I felt like if I could identify him, that would allow for some sort of conclusion. Yeah. I mean, I ultimately ended up getting the conclusion to my thing 2 weeks before it was due. And it ended up being an ending that I would have never expected. It was not the obvious ending.
Yeah.
And it.
But you made it work, though.
Yeah,
you definitely.
It was better than the obvious.
Yeah.
It felt like from a storytelling standpoint, it felt like a better ending.
I thought absolutely there was a beautiful ending, but boy, you just ruined my sleep on that one tonight. But it was a good story. Now, I mean. Now, as reporters, we're disciplined from our first assignment. Do not participate in the story. You keep yourself out of it. You're a clinical observer. You're detached. Do not make yourself part of the story. But you are the story. You make yourself part of the story on this journalistic enterprise. So how did you reconcile that? Or maybe it didn't even occur to you.
No, it did. I mean, I've mostly done that straight news reporting. I'm the voiceless, the faceless voice in the story. But I also have dabbled in first-person things in the past, so I had some experience with it. I wrote a dating column earlier in my career.
I heard about that.
Where I went on dates and then wrote about them, and then went to dating events. And it was the early days of online dating. I would try weird dating sites. I had an imaginary girlfriend. I had imaginarygirlfriend.com for $30 a month, paid for by the Courier Post of South Jersey. So I had some experience kind of writing about myself in a journalistic type way.
Frame, yeah.
Even when I was reporting on Christie, and I wrote a book about him, I mean, some of the book at times was first person. I felt like, in order to... So much
you did weave that in there, yes.
Because so much of who he was as a political figure involved his relationship with the media and sharing some of those stories felt relevant. So I had dabbled in that, and then in being in radio and public radio, there's more first person stuff than when you're writing for newspapers. When you're going on Brian Lehrer, you're saying, well, what, I was with the governor yesterday and so. So I had started to become more comfortable with that idea. Of course, like divulging my whole like personal life and putting my wife and kids and parents in a podcast is a different level of that. But I felt like I had, inched toward it.
Well, this new social media that we're in, this new era, the boundaries have all broken.
Totally.
All the rules seem to be just trash. And I'm an old dinosaur still adhering to the old rules, but I see things now that would have been an infamy, that would have been, forbidden 20, 30 years ago. Really? And so it just kind of, to me, maybe I'm from the old school, I'm a little uncomfortable with it, but there's an argument to be made that you get closer to the emotional truth of subjects sometimes by interjecting yourself.
Well, certainly people will connect more with the material when it's first person, particularly in audio. When you're in people's earbuds, it's almost like you're talking to them on the phone, or you're in the car with them. If they're listening to the podcast in the car, it is an extremely like intimate experience. So when somebody is telling a story through such an intimate medium and they're telling it in first person, it has more power just by the nature of that.
Just as an aside, covering Christie was always a big challenge, and Matt was, you were putting that book together, you were researching the book as you were reporting, and I'll never forget the time when we were at some event and Christie's sitting in the back of his SUV like a pharaoh, summons Matt, come here, Matt. And he goes over there, he gets in the back seat, the door's shut, and we can't see what's going on. And he comes out, his hair is standing up. His eyes are going counterclockwise, and you would not give that up.
All I'll say is
and they're talking about being a little personal, on a personal level with your subject. That was, so give it up right now.
I mean, what I will say is he went in the front seat. The state trooper opened the back seat for me. I go in the back seat. And then when the state trooper did not also get in the car, then I'm like, oh, shit.
Oh, my God. That's something Soprano-esque is going to happen. Yeah.
I don't actually remember what I did, but he was upset about a story, clearly.
Yeah, clearly.
And he scolded me, but he did it in such a way that you do as a parent would in the car, because he turned around like a parent would, as if I was like kicking the seat on the road trip or something.
All right.
He
was formidable. I had a few run-ins with Christie, but not in his chariot there. I mean,
one Christie-related piece of this. When I was writing the book, I did a full genealogical research on him, because I was interested. He talked so much about being this Italian, having this Italian persona. So I wanted to know more about that, and when his family came over, so I did this full research on him. And to do that, I had to go to Ancestry.com. I didn't have his DNA, but I was able to put in his name, and I knew the names of his parents, so I was able to find his grandparents. But to do that, I signed up as Chris Christie. So I had all this trouble re-signing up for Ancestry, because I had to use a different email address, because I thought I was Chris Christie.
Oh, man.
I gave him all the information that I got. I printed out a huge family tree for him. Oh. He never thanked me.
I'm sure he was not pleased. Now, in another interview about your podcast, you talked about this is sort of a blend of journalism and memoir. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, memoir relies on memory and not necessarily hard fact. And it can be unreliable sometimes. But I thought you did a good job of weaving in the kind of incomplete memory into this story.
I think that incomplete memory is sort of like just a part of this story naturally. I mean, there were, there's pieces of my memory that are hazy. My mother's, the doctor involved in this story, his memory is a big piece of it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about him,
And I realized, and I learned, so I think by attacking that head on, that reality, that memory is not perfect, and that we create narratives all the time. We create narratives about the full sweep of our lives. We create narratives about our day. Your partner asks you, how was your day? It was a great day. Maybe there were bad moments, but in that moment, you're thinking, it was a good, you create a narrative. And then the doctor created narratives about how he operated.
Yeah.
And I have a narrative about how my childhood and my original birth father. So I think by just acknowledging it, the one thing I did learn about memoir was that you don't divulge everything I did not. There are some things you keep to yourself, and memoir also affects other people. It's not just about you.
Correct.
When it's out there.
Well, we learned that definitely in this story. I mean, your mother learns that by the end of the podcast, she's saddled with a sense of betrayal about Dr. Dubrovner, who we're going to talk about. But one thing about narrative too, or in memoir, you control the narrative. You are in charge of it. You can omit facts, and you're empowered that way. Whereas
in journalism,
you try to break through that narrative a lot with inconvenient facts.
The other right, and the other journalism rule I violated in this is my parents and my kids and my wife and my siblings listened to the whole podcast before it came out, which you would never do in journalism. I would never give Chris Christie my article about it, Bridgegate, and be like, what do you think? But I didn't want to put something out there that would affect the relationships that are important to me. Mm-hmm. So I said, let me know if there's anything wrong, and let me know if there's anything you're uncomfortable with. I thought that was important to do.
Now, you mentioned the search angels before. I mean, there's an element about this story that kind of reminded me of an old Dickens novel where the plot is always moved along by people who, sort of this unconditional generosity of strangers or people that move the story along. And this definitely really happens with you with the search angel. I mean, I just,
Yes.
and then by the end we meet Gloria, who was one of the more fascinating.
Yes.
Your true father's devoted girlfriend, who's now in her 80s.
Yes.
Was an amazing figure, a big-hearted, warm, and I think she gave you a lot of kind of emotional closure at the end, and it was perfect. I thought that was such a perfect ending. But who do you think, I mean, looking back at this, was the most critical of all these people who came to your aid and in the story, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's so true. It really felt like kind of I was on the yellow brick road, and that there were these characters along the way that were just kind of pointing me in the right direction. I think a lot about this first cousin once removed that the genealogist helped me find. This person, her first name is Ryan, and we were looking for obviously a male Ryan.
Yeah, so was I when my ear was.
Until my genealogist found this female Ryan. And she was she was able to get the confirmation I needed that the man I had found and thought to be my now real biological father I was on the right path, and this was the guy. And she had the first conversation we had. She tells me that she has 3 kids and she has 2 twins, and they have no contact with their biological father, her former husband. So she's like, I understand your need to know this information. I feel connected to you, and I'm going to help.
And she helped.
She's like, and she said that she would just in passing see these, like there's a peace in. She would say these like just beautiful, poignant things, like there's a peace in knowing, and I'll help you as best as I can. This stranger, I just contacted randomly on
That's
Facebook.
what I mean. That's incredible.
And she did, and she asked her grandmother, who was my father's former sister-in-law, if, Uncle Vincent had ever donated sperm in the 70s in New York City. And she's like, oh, yeah, he did. He talked about it all the time. And that was and once I had that piece of information, it was, I'm like,
Oh, you're off to the races, yes, right.
I got some other confirmation after that, but that was the, and she just did it out of we just texted the other day. We still have, never met in person. She grew up, she had around the corner from where Vincent lived while he was donating sperm in the 70s in the West Village, in Greenwich Village. Her daughter looks like my daughter. It was amazing.
That was one of my questions. I mean, subsequently, have you learned more about him since the production? Have more details come in, about that?
I was hoping, I had this idea, well, there must be more people out there.
Yeah.
Somebody must hear this name. No, but I did last week get a new lead of somebody who knew him. And we are in contact, but haven't spoken yet. So I'm hoping for more, because there's a lot, I know a lot. I learned a lot about his life up to the very moment he donated sperm, up to the moment he became my father. And then I know almost nothing about the second half of his life. And maybe that's the way it was meant to be. Maybe I'm not supposed to know more than that. But I do. I'm still covering the story.
Yeah, right. It's like sometimes when you write a story and it hits the paper,
right. You
and
shake the tree.
People, you shake the tree, and people start calling with new leads, or you forgot to put this in, and
right.
And next thing you know, did you check out this guy?
Somebody.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And the other thing this story is crucial to this story is luck.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I think there's the discovery of Dr. Dubrovner and that he's alive was immensely a huge piece of luck to make this thing. This story really doesn't happen without him in a lot of ways.
No,
and he's not only willing to help, he goes on the record, which I was like, Jesus, where the hell, this guy, don't discourage him, just get in there with that microphone.
Right.
And you did, and he's central to this whole drama. And he's also, I think, the most morally complicated figure in this drama. Was it hard getting him to talk? Or, I mean, the way that comes off in the podcast, it's like, yeah, I'll pick up the phone. Here I am. Let's chat. I got nothing to hide. Or was it a little more difficult than that?
It was not from a reporting standpoint all that difficult. I found this Facebook group of people who were conceived in his office, and from there, somebody had already had talked to him and had a phone number for him, and then I called, and he agreed to talk to me. So from a logistical standpoint, it was easy. From there were very few interviews I've been more nervous about. We had a few different interviews, 3. Very nervous calling. When I met him in person, extremely anxious beforehand, the night before, because you go into an interview with a politician you know is corrupt. It's like, I got all this information. I'm gonna nail him. I don't worry about. What am I gonna worry about here? Maybe he'll yell at me, but that's it. With him, I have complicated feelings. I mean, I wouldn't be here. You would all be home warm watching Netflix if it wasn't for Dr. Dubrovner tonight. But I'm here because of him. But he also operated clearly in a either deceitful or error-filled way. I mean, what he told me turned out not to be true about how he said I came to exist.
He struck me. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you finish. I interrupted.
And then what? How I know he handled things with my mom. As she remembers it, and as all the other evidence indicates. is really upsetting and disturbing.
It was.
But he also is like, but it was complicated talking to him because I do exist because of him. I do think he was on the forefront of what in many ways was a important innovation in helping families, in helping create families. He's also older, like quite old, and I mean, I want to be respectful to that. He's also kind. I mean, from interpersonally, he's just a kind guy, polite.
Yeah.
So it was very, a lot of anxiety.
It seemed like he was an ends justify the means kind of guy. I mean, he rationalized some of these elements of deceit. And by the way, can you enumerate some of the
sure.
some of the levels of deceit?
Yeah, and I'll say this was the industry standard in the medical community. Also in the 70s, he was not like coloring outside the lines. Essentially, for the most part, essentially in the 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, before IVF. The way that a couple struggling with infertility would deal with that was through IUI. So the doctor, the obstetrician, would inseminate the woman with the husband's sperm to get closer to the uterus. When that didn't work, the doctors would solicit sperm initially from medical students in their practice, and that's the legitimate piece of it. The specifics of that are harder to understand. All of the sperm donations were anonymous. There were nobody across the board in this country, every Western country at the time. So no child would ever know who their biological father was. That meant they wouldn't know who their siblings were. That meant they wouldn't know what the medical implications of what medical problems their father might have and how that might affect them. In addition, the doctors would tell the parents, do not talk about this with your child ever. They should only know the husband as the father. In addition to that, they would do 3 cycles of the insemination, and if the medical student, and they would page the medical student or the resident at the hospital when the woman was ovulating. So they would need a sample pretty quickly. So if the medical student who had delivered sample 1 wasn't there, they would get another medical student to deliver sample 2, which made the identity of the father even vaguer. And then at times, in order to convince, and this is documented in medical journals, in order to convince sometimes reluctant husbands to go through with this procedure, and they would be reluctant because of the idea that they weren't having their own kid and that they had issues with their own virility, they would mix the sperm of the husband, which they knew didn't work. They knew it didn't work, with that of the medical student. And then they would tell the couples, we don't know what they would tell the couples.
Yeah.
We know that, and sometimes they told the couples, this is your husband's sperm we're inseminating you with, and we're taking this, and sometimes they would say, well, there is other sperm in there, but that's just boosting.
Yeah, that's like that's a B12 shot.
The term that they used, that we know they used. We know it's from mothers who remember being told us, and from the medical journals. It was as if they would carry the shitty sperm on their back to the finish line. It's unbelievable.
It was, yeah.
And we also know that doctors today don't necessarily explain to their patients, particularly women, exactly what's going on during medical procedures. And we certainly know that was the case back then. So whatever it was these mothers, including my mom, were told at the time was not the full information about what was actually
Well, he admits that, and he also admits that he knew that it was, excuse my language, bullshit, that he knew that this idea of mixing was a false story to create a false narrative.
The medical journals they knew it was such a ruse that they were concerned that it was going to inhibit their ability to get the women pregnant. So they did a study to make sure that the sperm that didn't work wouldn't like delay the insemination of the good sperm. So they wanted to make sure that a ruse wasn't actually affecting, like
They want to make sure the
preventing
booster was not the booster.
They want to make sure the booster, this fake booster, was not actually causing
was an
delays.
impediment, yeah.
An impediment.
Oh,
And then the other thing they would do, which is, they would match. They said that they would match the hair color, the blood type, the eye color, and the religion of the husband with that of the donor.
Yeah.
And that was how nobody would ever know going forward that they had a sperm donor father. We know from my case, of course, that is not what happened. They also said they would use a medical students and residents only. We know from my case that didn't happen. And there was one other donor-conceived child I put in my podcast, Lauren.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about Lauren. She broke my heart listening to that. She was the heartbreak of that whole story.
But she also, that was not the case in terms of the matching of the, they called it matching of the donor and the...
It was the most painful thing to listen. I listened to it again, and Lauren is, just a thumbnail, grew up not far from you on Long Island.
Same age.
Raised in a Jewish girl, but it becomes, slowly dawns on her parents that she's black. Mm-hmm. And she eventually takes a DNA test or an ancestry test, and that confirms it.
At 40, she finds out she thought she was a white Jewish woman. She knew she did not look white Jewish.
Early, and she intuitively knew that she was, something was off, or that she probably may have been black, but she never really came to terms with it until the test. And but as you probably heard, that family, her parents went to great lengths to suppress her identity, to the point of not letting her swim in a pool party and during the daytime, out of fear that she might turn dark and become black because from her tanning.
Or they'd straighten her hair,
nose surgery,
painful hair straightening experiences.
It was almost a form of torture, really.
She goes to college. She's put on the listserv for the Black Student Union. She has to unsubscribe.
But I thought the most painful part, maybe you talked to her at length, but she's, because her mother is Jewish, she's passed on as Jewish, but as you said, that gets complicated. She reveals the sense that her parents really didn't accept her as Jewish. Do I have that right? Or they just didn't accept her because she was black, or she's Jewish technically, but she's not really Jewish in the traditional sense.
Yes.
And that puts her in a tailspin of this nether region of identity.
Yes. And she identifies as a Jewish woman. She feels as if she's not seen now by her family as fully Jewish anymore. She can't claim this identity of being a black woman because she's lived 40 years as a white woman and doesn't understand what she can claim. She doesn't know what to tell her children. So this deceit from 45, 50 years ago, plays out in many different ways today.
I thought it was a central part of the story and a contrast too, because in your case, you're supported by a nurturing, loving family, and they're with you arm in arm through this journey. And then we contrast to Lauren, whose family punishes her and almost abandons her in a sense, or she has a sense that they've abandoned her, and they won't come to terms with her new identity at all. I thought that was really central to the story. And the other thing about her that really pained me is that she almost punishes herself in her interviews. She goes, I feel so stupid. She said it like 4 times. I feel so stupid, because she kind of intuitively knew that this was the reality, but she didn't want to confront it.
Yeah.
And she's like punishing herself. She has nothing to punish herself for. It was really a powerful moment in your podcast.
I felt like I had a more positive experience with all of this for several ways. One of which being I am just a different kind of white guy. I present the same to the world.
Yeah.
And so many other people have a more difficult experience for a variety of reasons that I thought it was very important to include her story because of that.
Yeah, no, it really added a great dimension. Now you also, you discover you have 3 half-siblings, and they're marvelous characters in this. And they have I don't know if you've sensed it, but they had some of your sense of humor, and I picked up on it because I knew you, yeah. They're sort of Matt Katz kind of wily humor, but
There's we immediately started like talking smack to one another. Like it felt sibling. It feels sibling-like.
Yeah,
It's
throwing
amazing.
a few elbows, that kind of thing. Yeah, I got that sense from now. And you've integrated them into your life. So how is that? Has that continued? I mean, and has it expanded?
It has, yeah. 2 of my 3 siblings came to Philadelphia in June for my daughter's bat mitzvah. So they got to meet my parents, which was very cool. The rest of my family. One of my sisters, I live in Philly, and one of my sisters just moved to Philly for a job, the Philly Burbs. Excuse me. So she's 2 little kids. I have 2 kids. They came over a few months ago, and like we had dinner and whatnot, and then the kids were playing together. By the end of the night, they had a big pillow fight in the living room. I just look over, and it looks like, it's like #cousins. It looks like cousins, and it's just beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah, and you never had that before,
I had no first cousins.
except for
I
Richard's older, his kids from his first marriage.
I had my sisters through my dad adopted me. He had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. I had my 2 sisters, but I had no, like, they were older than me. Growing up, I had no first cousins at all, and I had no first cousins my age. And really, and it's just a small family too. Like it was just me in the house, and so this has been wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And so then as you wind down and get closer to, there's another reporter moment there I got to ask you about, and that is you're about to make the phone call to Vincent, and you think this is going to be, you got the number from the
Nexus. I got it from Nexus.
Nexus. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And you're about to make the phone call, but then you hit the brakes and check out a death certificate database, and you find that he's not alive. So this cancels the phone call. But there's part of me wonders that you didn't want to touch that. You kind of like put that off. You knew about that database. You could have done it earlier, but you really wanted to get this close. But your journalistic,
I don't know.
Your
why I didn't
journalistic
find that
instinct said,
immediately.
you know what, I better do this the right way. Make sure I'm not wasting my time. I don't know. It just seemed like you wanted to be at that point.
Yeah, it was truly a gift that, like, for a week I knew his name, I knew who he was, and I thought he could be alive. And my siblings knew. I got to tell my siblings, and we had a chance to live with the possibility of his existence. And we started like daydreaming about knocking on all 4 of us knocking on his door, and I think I'm really glad we had that. I'm glad I didn't find out he was dead immediately. And I don't know why. So I don't know why I didn't get that immediately.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah. Now, and finally, we're getting close to that question period time here, but I thought the ending of the story, not just Gloria, who really fills out as much as she possibly can her relationship with Vincent, but your conversations with these candid conversations with your family, and your realization that even though you're half Irish, that you still want to participate in the Jewish custom and have that sort of continuity in your life. And what comes across, certainly the first time I heard, is this deep well of appreciation of the family you do have.
For sure.
And it reminded me of, my wife's a storyteller, and she tells a story about when she's in front of groups about this guy who goes off to seek treasure, leaves his family behind, goes off to seek treasure, and eventually comes home and discovers it's in the basement. That the treasure he's searching for is right there. And I think the line is, sometimes you have to travel far to find what is near.
Oh man, I
And
love that.
is that really kind of what happened to you at the end of this 8-part series?
Oh man, yeah. It was so. It was so wonderful to, have the opportunity just to talk to my mom about, just sit down, even if it was with the mic and even if it was for the podcast. We spent hours just talking about, how me growing up and how she met my dad, and then talking to my dad about how he met my mom, and then about his family story. And all of this kind of gave the opportunity to have those conversations, gave me the opportunity to have those conversations and those experiences. And because of that, I think it was great for our relationship and brought us closer in that way. And I don't think I didn't appreciate my family, and now I can go off looking for a new family, but really I have the family at home. It was more that I was able to, it became a conduit for really kind of strengthening those bonds. It was really, even and for my wife and kids too, we could have these, wonderful moments when the way my daughter came to me after I found out my father had died, and all of that was really a bonding experience. This whole experience was a bonding for me and my kids, for me and my parents.
Right.
So it wasn't necessarily just I got a greater appreciation, but I did really, connect more with the people I already knew were my family, even though I had been, looking for this other piece of my family.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, Master of Ceremonies over there.
Is this mic on? Oh, now it is. Can we get a round of applause for Charlie and Matt? If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, and I'll try to get there as fast as I can.
So I wonder, did you ever think, this outfit is just bunkum, because I can't possibly be 20% or 25% or 50%? Did you ever think,
there's, I did a little research about these things, right? They are accurate, particularly when it comes to Europeans. Because they have so much information. So maybe for a second, I probably Googled it and did a little bit of research, but there is no evidence to the contrary that they are not accurate. So it was maybe a passing thought, but yeah, it's all. The range, when there's a range, obviously that can go different ways. But once it got nailed down to 50, and then eventually I did the other DNA test. So I had done Ancestry.com, and then I did 23andMe. And when 23andMe came back with the exact same results and some of the same relatives, I knew that it was legit.
Other questions? And journalists in the room, I think.
Great job, both of you. So interesting. So, Matt, Mary Caffrey, I
Hi.
write about medicine, and I was just appalled reading all the parts about the doctor, and just two things. One, I'm curious if you've heard from any, medical ethics groups or any licensing agencies or anything like that. Just, yes or no. I'm just curious.
No, in fact, if you want a story, there's nothing illegal that was done, and if it happened today, it wouldn't be illegal.
I was going to ask that too. That is amazing.
There's a couple of states, Colorado, but there's no mandates that sperm donors are identified, that the children even at 18 can know who their sperm donors are. There's no obligation. The only requirements for sperm donors in this country to this day are that you cannot have had sex with a man, that you be 5'8" or 10. There's no legal requirements for medical screenings. There's no maximum number of donations. So I had lunch with a guy last year who has, at the time, I think he had, I know I'm going to forget the number, but he had something like 300 children around the world.
Woo. That's a
So,
goodness list.
and there's a Netflix documentary about a guy they think in the Netherlands who they think has 1,500. So other countries have limitations. We have almost nothing. So it actually is. There's no restrictions on mixing sperm of different people. So yeah, it's amazing. And there's efforts. There's a bill in the New Jersey legislature actually. I can send it to you.
I thought one of the funniest moments in the podcast was a line from your mother. She said, well, when she learned of that you might have multiple siblings, she goes, well, I always wanted you to have more than one.
Yeah. I didn't want you to be an only child.
I didn't want you to be an only child. Thank you. That was awesome.
My other question, if I could, just one quick one. One of the things that also struck me is that at the time that all this happened, like most specialties, OBGYNs were overwhelmingly male. I mean, that was just how it was. Today, OBGYNs are one of the few specialties that are overwhelmingly female. And I wonder if you've given any thought to the fact that, would this happen today? If the doctor was female, do you think this would happen? Would a female doctor, treat female patients this way?
Probably not. That's an interesting question. I never thought about that. The one thing that has changed dramatically is IVF. So once IVF was introduced, the first IVF baby was born in July 1978, 2 weeks after I was born in England. There's actually a new Netflix movie. It's pretty good called Joy about the first IVF baby, the people who came up with it, and a woman was involved in the first, a scientist who had been sidelined in the history books, but actually had a critical role in the first IVF baby coming to me. So today, if you are a straight couple who can't conceive, IVF becomes, even if there's male infertility problems, IVF is the route now. So the people using sperm donors today are generally single mothers by choice or gay couples. And in those cases, the child will, at some point, usually by, at least by 12 years old, realize that there was sperm involved from somebody else out there, and they will know that they were conceived by a sperm donor, even if their mother never tells them, right? So there's, just by the nature of it, there's not the same sort of lack of information. The problem though is when donors are used excessively. The problem is I got an email from I've heard amazing stories from people, got an email from a woman who was, and this is really, I was born in the 70s, this is really an 80s and 90s phenomenon when sperm donation became a much bigger deal, but there weren't a lot of necessarily sperm donors, and you just go and the mothers would go and look at the book, and so the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed donor became very popular, and there'd be one doctor doing inseminations in a county, right? And a lot of mothers are using this one donor, and then 15 years later, a bunch of kids are in high school together, and they don't realize that they all have the same father. I just heard from a woman who just found out her high school boyfriend is her half brother.
Oh,
so that is actually increasingly that is a phenomenon of the next era of sperm donation. Today, now, given who's using sperm donors, it's we're a little bit more aware, but there is no limitations. So if you're donating sperm to 100 mothers in one county, then it's inevitable that some of them are going to end up in the same high school together.
Oh. Yeah.
Other questions? It's so many issues covered in this podcast that I thought there'd be more questions.
Oh, here's one.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm super glad that you mentioned the legislation in New Jersey. I was going to ask you if you were aware of it. So I guess instead of that question, I will ask you, do you have any interest in getting involved in the legislation?
Are
Have
you
reached
involved?
out?
Are you active?
Personally, I work in the New Jersey legislature more. I don't work for the legislature anymore, but I work in Trenton quite often. And so I was curious.
So you're familiar with the bill, and what is the status of? Is it going anywhere?
So it's bipartisan. I know the Senate sponsor, I just Googled it really quickly. The
cool.
Senate sponsor is a Republican, actually, Senator Corrado from North Jersey.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Senate president is actually her co-prime sponsor. In the Assembly, I think it's Assemblywoman Murphy. She's from South Jersey.
Yeah.
And I think the bill actually came to fruition because of a similar story from another young woman who found out that her mother became pregnant because her OBGYN used his own sperm.
Right. That is another.
Yes, but it
Scandal,
would
yes.
extend to inseminations where the patient is not adequately informed and
Right.
consenting. So I was just curious if that was something that you were following at all, and if you were planning on sharing your story.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about that, or you could connect me to the right people. Sure.
And what would the bill do? Just in thumbnail, what would the bill do?
It would establish a crime of fertility fraud.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a third-degree crime off the top of my head, but
So this is to prevent like doctors from using their own sperm, which became a thing.
Got it.
owner where the patient does not consent to that explicitly.
And at least in some of the legislation, I don't know about this one. In some states, there's a limits placed on donors. A donor can donate 15 times, or to 15 different women is like a standard in other countries. And then there's also issues related to people getting information when they're 18, at least about like medical history, and that kind of thing.
I don't think this one goes that
Okay.
far, but yes, I'll find you afterwards.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm just curious. I know your Jewish identity is important, strong, comes through. Are any of your half siblings Jewish?
No, but one of my half siblings found out that one of their siblings that they grew up with, they found out that both of the siblings they grew up with are not their fully biological siblings through this process. So those siblings also then, because of me, found out that they were donor conceived.
Okay.
And they all had 3 different donors, same mother. So one of those siblings is Jewish. Her father was Jewish.
Your donor-in-law.
My donor, my
I'm making up something.
Dibbling is the term, right?
Yeah.
They call donor conceived siblings dibbling. So my dibbling sibling is half Jewish. So I told my dibbling that now they have a fully Jewish sibling between me and the other sibling. Does that make sense?
Follow-up question. If none of them are Jewish, are there parts of your personality that you sort of attributed to your Jewish cultural upbringing that now that you have these other siblings that have them, you're like, not really, that came from my Irish
there's all
side.
these things like that I kind of I tell stories for a living, but like that's both a Jewish and an Irish thing. So there's these identity things that are I'm finding are like common. And I always had felt as a reporter, I spent a lot of time in churches, like at funerals, and you just end up in I don't know. I ended up in Catholic churches a bunch as a reporter. I'd never been as a child, and also Protestant churches and whatnot. And I always found, I've been in mosques and all other religious establishments. I always felt like Catholic churches were so similar to synagogues to me. I mean, they're talking a language that I don't understand. There's this old ritual. It's so like paternalistic. I mean, it felt. I always felt Catholicism and Judaism were so much more similar to me as an outsider than Catholicism and Protestant denominations. So I feel like this, and my family turned out Irish and also Catholic. So I'm reconciling it in all different kinds of ways in my brain.
Question.
We'll start here and then Eve.
Well, as someone that has an Irish heritage, I'm really interested in knowing how your feeling of identity has changed since you know you're 50% Irish.
Yeah, I still, I'm like super interested in Irish culture. I've been watching Irish movies. I read a long book about the Troubles by Patrick Rankin. Great book, right? Amazing. So I've been like learning the history. I'm reading, you know, I'm following the politics. We went to Ireland, and I bought a bottle of Irish whiskey I'm like exploring Irish whiskey. There's all these new Irish whiskeys available. But I don't feel like less Jewish, and I don't just say that because my mother's in the front row. I really don't. I feel like the things, but it's clarified my kind of Jewish identity in my head. And it made me realize that the things I most connected to about being Jewish were the fact that I was doing something that I was following in a tradition that my ancestors had done. I'm walking to synagogue with my father, just like 200 years ago, my great-great-grandfather was walking to synagogue with his father. I'm bringing 20 people over to, more, 50 people over to our house for a bris 8 days into my son's life. That's something, you know, the original covenant with God, right? So happening for generations. And I realized what I had always, before this revelation, what I'd always liked about those things was it made me feel part of a larger thing. Like I'm not just passing through in this life. I'm connected to other people who have done these same things, and I can still connect to ancestors. It's just a means of connecting to ancestors, and I'm still now doing that even more than I ever have. So I think that's why I always appreciated Judaism, and that's what having that religious identity, and that's what I'm continuing to get out of it now. And then I found this, in the course of doing the research for this podcast, I found this interesting Catholic connection to my Jewish life. I found a little paper I wrote as an 8th grader where I interviewed my mom's mom, my Jewish grandmother, and she told a story about how her parents were saved by Catholics in Poland when they were, during a pogrom, they were coming around looking for the Jews, and they borrowed what she called Catholic articles, I assume like a cross, from a Catholic neighbor to put in their house to pass as Catholic so their house wouldn't get presumably burned down. It was a story that I had forgotten, that my mother had forgotten.
Wow.
And so it made me just feel like, these ancestors are all connected. We all have different ways of using religion to connect to our ancestry, and it doesn't really matter per se, what book we're looking at when we're doing these rituals. It's all just the means of connecting to the people who got us here.
Hi. You may have already answered this, sort of, but so I'm asking this because my best friend who's adopted, went on a search for her parents and discovered her birth father was Italian. It actually turned out not to be the person she thought it was, but his best friend. But anyway, so complicated. But she had always felt really drawn to Italian things. Like she ended up studying Italian in college, like long before she knew this. So I think you've said no, but I was wondering if you look back on your life before these revelations, did you have any interest or any connection to Irish culture, anything? Did anything draw you, or it was completely not on
I mean, other than the jokes about like whiskey and whatnot, no, I can't, no. But it does remind me of a thing that I've been amazed by. All of my siblings, we had, in our past, we had moments where we like nearly crossed paths. And my one new sister who's an energy healer in California, she believes that people who are biologically connected are physically drawn to each other. And, she lived in Malibu for a brief time when she was a kid. At the same time, it turns out we now know my father lived in Malibu. Malibu's not that big. I took community college classes one summer at the same college my brother was at while he was at that same little college. My other sister met her husband at a bar in Philadelphia. This is 2 states away from where we were conceived. At a bar that I used to hang out at the same time I was hanging out there. Like, we may have been in the bar at the same time. She met her husband there. We actually all went back to the bar a few months ago to have dinner. So I think there were elements of this that were always there. I just haven't seen, it wasn't like I was drawing the Irish clover in my notebook as a kid for no reason.
Your mother-in-law pegged you as Irish when she first met you, right?
Right. I would get that. Like my wife's aunt. My wife's grandmother. When she met me, she thought. She looks. She's like, you're Jewish? I'm like, yeah, Grandma, I'm Jewish. She's like, nah. What are you talking about? She goes, we didn't use this in the podcast.
Go
but she's
for
like,
it.
I'm gonna call you Mick. That's what she said to me. She grew up in the Bronx, and then this was before everybody was in their own clans. We hadn't really mixed as Americans just yet. These were all new immigrants, and the Irish looked, they did a certain kind of jobs, and they lived on a certain block, and you knew what Irish people looked like. And the Jews lived in another block, and she looked at me, and she's like, you look like the kids in the Irish block. She was right.
So I have a question about the lady who you had on your podcast who broke your heart listening to, and wondered if you still have contact with her and whether or not she'd ever read the book, The Color of Water, which was a very powerful book about a young woman who left her Orthodox home because her father was molesting her and her sister, and she had an affair with 16 with another 16-year-old who happened to be black, married him, had 6 children with him, and raised those children Christian. And and then he died. She married another black man, had 6 more children, and the children would always ask her. One of her sons wrote the book. Children would always ask her, "What color are you, Mom?" Because she lived in black neighborhoods. She never identified any longer as white, but she raised the children, and she always said, "I'm the color of water." And I think it might be therapeutic for that young woman or older woman or middle-aged woman, however old she is, to understand that being black and Jewish, for a Jewish woman, actually, who was raised Jewish and identified as that,
those things can be reconciled.
It's a very positive experience.
I have been in touch with her, and I don't know if she read the book,
might be
but
a book that she might benefit from reading.
I did get a bunch, thank you for that. I did get a bunch of positive messages of support for her, people who have, tangentially related situations, and they, I passed them on to her, and it was meaningful to hear that. It helped, because I'm really the only person she had talked to about this. She knew she was going to be on the podcast, but I was the only person she'd really talked to about this. So, The Color of Water.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
James McBride, right? Yeah.
James McBride, who
actually grew up in Ewing.
At the library and lived in Yardley for a while. He's in Virginia now.
I read his last book, which was called...
Any other questions?
Yeah, Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. Did you read it? I read The Color of Earth.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your podcast.
Thank
you
you.
made miles of running just fly by.
Nice.
So thank you.
I love hearing where people heard it. That's great.
While we're talking About reading lists, have you come across the nonfiction book, The Lost Family?
I have, yes.
Because I think it's so interesting in that in some ways it's the opposite story. A woman thinks her father's 100% Irish, finds out he's 100% Jewish, and it becomes almost, to me, a story of, and it goes back to the Bronx in the 1920s, the mystery of who her father was. And to me, it was almost an interesting study in nature versus nurture. What happened to this Irish boy who was raised in a Jewish family? What happened to this Jewish boy who was raised in an Irish family? And
I need to
very
go back.
interesting
You know,
read.
I need to go back, and that's a good reminder. I knew the book, but I don't know if I ever got into it. So did you come to any conclusion about nature versus nurture from it?
Well, this is going to sound horrible, but it turns out that the Irish boy who was really Jewish, nobody could understand why he was the only smart one in the family, why he was good, and the Irish boy who was raised in a Jewish family, he was a really nice guy, but the family couldn't figure out why he never. This is my conclusion.
Wow. Wow. Right. There's someone back? Oh.
Yeah, I just want to make a remark. In this country, Jews are considered like Italians or Germans, or But in Europe, when you grow up, Jews were basically Frenchmen or women, or Hungarian, where I'm from, or German. They were, that was their first identity, and there's just a little bit difference between what we look at, like we're talking about Irish or Jewish. Well, a Jew who was in Ireland and grew up in Ireland was Irish.
Right.
Whose religion was Jewish.
Yes, that's very, very true. And Jews are ethno religion, right? So there's not a way to compare them to other entities in that, on the same plane.
There were many other religions with 20, 30 gods. And my brother said that they had to go into the stable and massacre or some animals to have a big meal of one of the birthdays of these gods. So they remained poor. So when the Jews came in with one god, it was so. It solved a lot of problems that people. That was my brother's.
That's amazing.
I'll add to your reading list, Fintan O'Toole in his book, We Don't Know Ourselves, which is a modern history of Ireland. Oh. There's a chapter in there about Jews in Ireland. So.
Right at the time. There was a mayor of Dublin, right?
No, he's a he's an author. He's an essayist.
We don't know what is it? We don't know
ourselves.
I just wanted to ask if you heard from the doctor after the podcast aired, number one. And number two, I wanted to give a shout out to your adopted dad, who I listened to the podcast while walking, and I fell in love with him, and he made me tear up. He was just so gentle and emotive, and he was a hero to me early in the podcast. So just wanted to say that. But I did wonder if you heard from the doctor.
I did.
I'm sorry.
No, he listened, and he had. I think it was. He was. Yes, but I don't think I think I should not. I feel like I didn't get anything wrong. Right? There's nothing I need to correct after the fact. He didn't tell me he wanted me to broadcast what he said. I didn't ask him if I could. We went we had a back and forth correspondence, but I feel like I should leave it at there, Wendy.
Yeah, sure.
Wendy, of course you asked me the toughest question. Pulitzer Prize winner.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
but
Thank
you know,
for the kind words about that.
on that last interview you had with him, it was clear that you were struggling, or it was clear, it came across to me that you were struggling between trying to be respectful, because you did, I mean, he's a source, he made you who you are, and he was instrumental in that, but there was an element of anger about him because of some of your discoveries about some of the falsehoods and deceptions that you discovered, and including the one that involved your mother. So you were teetering on getting angry, but you kind of pulled back, or is that a fair read?
What I think I'm still most angry about is he sent me down the wrong path, right? I mean, he sent me down a path looking for a medical student.
Jewish medical
student.
student.
I knew it wasn't Jew. I knew at that point it was Jewish, so I was looking for an Irish medical student. Because he told me once I found him, he told me he only used medical students and residents. So I was looking for an Irish, presumably OBGYN for years. I spent a lot of time looking for an Irish OBGYN with the last name, with one of the last names I was finding of cousins on Ancestry.com. And then it turns out he was never a medical student. So that, and during that time he died, right? So not that I necessarily would have located him beforehand, but I did get sent down the wrong path. And maybe if I hadn't, I would have been able to find him before he died. So I think that's...
so that's the other that's the other vein of anger in there, yeah.
Because that's literally I only used medical students and residents. That's what he told me.
Right, and he stuck by that, yeah. And if the evidence was compellingly, go to Lauren, for example, not true.
We don't know how...
She says my parents were lied to at every aspect.
Because Lauren also didn't have a medical student father. And we don't know how... we couldn't find any ads in the Village Voice or something to donate. We don't know how he would have even found a non-medical student to donate. I mean, I've come up with scenarios. The most interesting being the doctor's wife was on All As the World Turns.
That was
Remember the soap opera for 40 years?
Yeah.
And my father turned out to be an actor. And then I found somebody who was in a play with my biological father who was also briefly on As the World Turns.
Right.
So maybe there was an As the World Turns Christmas party, and the doctor's there, and my father's there, and he's like, "How do
let's
I make,
go? Let's go. You're
talking,
at the bar.
What do you do?" And it's like, I use sperm to make babies. I pay people for it, and my underemployed actor father's like, how much you pay?
Yeah, I'm about to get X'd out of the series. I'm going to get shot in episode 3, and I'm going to need the money.
Right.
I'll stand up because I'm small. I'm curious as to what your book, when it's going to come out, and what is going to be in it. In terms of I'm sure it's more than your podcast.
Yes, thank you.
And I just want to make a comment. You would be a nightmare to get a top secret security clearance someplace.
It's very true.
No pressure on the book or anything, but...
Charlie with all the details of what's going on. So my book is slated at the moment for Father's Day 2027. It will be about my story, but it will actually, that's just a piece of it. It's going to incorporate, I got so many messages of people with unbelievable stories about their families, DNA discoveries, beautiful stories about step parents, adoption, IVF. So I'm sort of going to try to trace the changes in the conception of family over the course of my life, using my story as sort of the narrative engine. I heard from a guy recently, long-haul trucker in Canada. He listened while he was trucking around. He just found out his uncle is his father and his father is his uncle. And that's because, which is just like one, tale. And that had nothing to do with sperm donation. That was just because his mother slept with her sister's boyfriend 45 years ago. Nobody said a word about it. And now he found this out and the whole family's upended. So there's, sad stories, there's beautiful stories. And I think they give us a window into just the changing nature of family. Family means so much more, and there's not language for these things. I mean, there's not even a language for what my stepfather adopts me. He's my dad, but there's not like a word to describe that. The dibblings is the word. Is this ugly word that we came up with for siblings who were donor conceived. So there are so many new kinds of just family that we're having to invent words for it. So that's the conceit of the book. There's going to be a little announcement about it sometime in the next week or so. But you guys know now.
Matt? I loved all of the coincidences in the book. And the one that I think that you missed saying anything about is your biological father's last play.
I was going to mention that. Thank you, Richard. I'll prove it here. I'll show it to him. I appreciate it.
It was more than one of it, but his very last performance that we could find any record of, we think he stopped acting after this. He stopped acting, started donating sperm, and then moved to Southeast Asia for a little bit. That's all we know, and then ended up in California. But when he stopped donating, when he quit acting, the last role he had was as a father who had estranged children who came back to find him when they were adults. Like he played the role of the man he was about to become. And then the most bizarre thing of it all, in the very, very end, is I find his girlfriend from Gloria from 60 years ago. And the last time she saw him, he was donating sperm in the city in the 1977. So the last time she saw him was literally at the time I'm being conceived. And he tells her he's donating sperm. And this is my first call with Gloria, the first conversation. I'm like, Gloria, it's amazing that you remember this moment that he told you this little thing that he was donating sperm.
That to me was like probably the most powerful piece of confirmation out of all of it.
I mean, she remembers this.
I mean, you have all those other details and you put the mosaic together, but that.
And she's like, I was so moved by it that I wrote it down. I wrote a TV pitch about a man who donates sperm.
Well, she did.
She wrote the pitch in 1978 when I'm born about a man named Vincent, his name, who donates sperm, and then his adult child, a daughter, comes and finds him, and the end of this pitch for a TV series, it's like a happy ending. She wrote that then.
That's really.
And she had a copy.
Oh my God.
She had written my happy ending, this happy, positive ending to my story while I was still, in my mother's belly.
Oh my God. I'm telling you, you got about 4 or 5 screenplay pitches out of this thing. Seriously, I don't want to sound like Danny Rose over here. You're going to go far, kid. Don't worry about it. I'm telling you, there are about 4 or 5 great, whether Netflix or a feature film, you got it going on there.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, hey.
Wouldn't you? I mean, let's churn it.
I want to thank you both for making it so very interesting. But one thing I learned from the story is the nature part you cannot change, the physical features.
Yeah.
And the nurture part, that is the genetics. And the nurture part is the epigenetics, is what you are forming from the world around you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's why you're still Jewish and you still follow the culture.
I think. And that's why, that's why my, dad had an imprint on me. That's the epigenetics, that's the nurture, for sure.
I want to just say one thing, though, about Richard. The one thing, the most annoying thing in the whole podcast is you going up and dropping that bomb on him while he's reading a book at bedtime. I mean, that's like sacred time. I'm reading a book, and here comes, Jesus. He ruined his sleep. Nice job.
He was happy to get that news.
Do you know why I was laughing? Anything would be better to have my son have other genes than her first husband.
Oh, yes. That was clear. That was absolutely clear.
That's why I laughed.
That was patently clear.
Yeah, so my question is, how old were you when you learned you were the result of artificial insemination?
I was, let's see, it was 2018. So I was 40. I just turned 40. Yeah, so I'm 46 now. Yeah, 40 years old. So halfway through life, I like to say. It was late in life to learn such a thing. Although I heard from somebody the other day, he's a TV anchor in Columbus, Ohio, retired. He found out in his 70s that his father was not his father. So yeah, happened at any time, I guess.
So I'm adopted, and I'm still in search of my birth father, although I do know who my birth mother is. And my parents, my adopted parents who raised me, told me I was adopted really early, and so I knew all along that was good. So I was just kind of curious in your case.
Did they know you were looking for your biological parents?
They've passed away in the last decade, but I told them that I was looking. And I was successful in finding my birth mother, but not the birth father. And unfortunately, my birth mother had died 6 years before the search started. And so I couldn't just ask her. So, and then her siblings and her family members didn't know that secret.
I feel a lot strong connection with adoptees who were adopted by, who didn't know both their parents and looking for parents. In fact, before I talked to my mom, I watched this show on Lifetime about adoptees who find their parents and adult adoptees, and I was kept rewatching an episode where a adoptee talks to his adopted parents, who had a very loving relationship with his adopted parents, and I was interested to hear the language he used to explain why he was going on the search, because I felt like I needed that language to use when talking to my mom. Like, this is not about our relationship. This is just something, you're my parents, but this is just something I need. So I feel a kinship, so to speak, with adoptees in that regard.
And just a really quick anecdote, just about the nurture versus nature thing. It turns out that my biological uncle went to Caltech and majored in physics. And it turns out, without even knowing it, I also went to Caltech and majored in physics 26 years later. And furthermore, my birth mother, wanted to go to Caltech, but they didn't allow women at that time. So in some sense, I sort of fulfilled her dream, I guess.
Oh, that is interesting.
Oh, I love that. Wow. And then again, we are maybe geographically pulled to our biological relations. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Wow, cool.
Chance for question. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
both
guys.
of you. This was amazing.